I'm very, very honored to introduce the next segment right now and introduce Sophie Grégoire Trudeau, who is with us. And I'm sure that all of you know Sophie Grégoire Trudeau. It is an honor, and I'm very grateful to have you with us, Sophie. Sophie is a best-selling author and mental health advocate, and we're very blessed she's joining us to talk about her new book, Closer Together, as we observe World Mental Health Awareness Day this week. And over the past 20 years, Sophie has been involved in a variety of causes as a speaker, interviewer, and an advocate. Thank you for joining us, Sophie. And we're going to play your introductory video just before we have you come on screen, because it's a beautiful video.
In a time when the world feels further apart, we need to draw closer together. Helping those who suffer from eating disorders led to a passion for helping anyone who wants to improve their mental health. It's become a core part of who I am. As a mental health, emotional literacy, and gender equality advocate for the past 2 decades, I've discovered more about human emotions than I ever thought I would. Wherever you are in your life right now, know that every day can be a new beginning. We can rewire our brains and mend our hearts. It's all possible, but it's not easy, and it shouldn't be. But together, we meet in ways that can help us heal and cope, no matter what struggles we are facing individually. From beginning to end, we are never strangers. Let us come closer together. I hope to meet you on the path.
Beautiful video by a beautiful human. I'm so honored to have you, Sophie.
It's my honor. Thank you for your playfulness. Thank you for your deep insight. I'm happy to join. And Gabor, thank you for your very courteous and kind ways of referring to my book. It just means a lot. But most of all, I'm just happy to meet all of you, friends and allies. It means a lot for me to be here today. And if I may just say that when you were talking about the footprint, I kept wanting to play with you guys and say, heartprint. What is the heartprint that we want to leave? Okay. But a lot of our, biology is holding us back in our own trauma and stories. So we need to know how to not be held back by it and understand it better. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I'm going to leave you and let you stay on screen together, and I will come back in 20 minutes if that's okay, so you can have a conversation together. And if it's okay, I'll come back and interrupt you in about 20 minutes and transition to the next segment and take questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, speaking of heartprint, so let me ask you a difficult question. So you wrote this book, Closer Together. There it is. I think I'm showing it. So I'm going to ask you sort of an arrogant question, okay?
I don't know you enough to know that you can be arrogant. Go ahead.
Why did you write this book? I mean, there's all these millions of books out there already on mental health, including by yours truly and a whole lot of other people that you interviewed. What did you want to do that only you could do? Like, what is your heartprint here that you wanted to create with this book?
You know what? To show and to share my respect for humanity and human beings and my fellow citizens and my fellow sisters and brothers. I wrote it because it came from a place of coherence and of integrity, where I decided in my own life path that I wanted to sit with the inconvenience of truth and be able to understand it better. And it is inconvenient because it hurts, but when we're not brought up to actually, be in solitude with our pain, I decided that I wanted to do that. And this is not just my work, my book. It would be completely condescending and arrogant to say that, this belongs to me. I think that this work belongs to everybody. And this is why I wrote the book, to be able to give the tools and give the science and make it accessible so people have the right to self-knowledge. They have the right to be able to turn inside of them without feeling panicked or scared, because so many of us do. And I'm going to return this question to you by asking, I just heard this morning when I was doing a course on the biology of trauma, that trauma is not psychology, it is biology.
Yeah, well, it's both.
So it sets into our bodies, whether it's your work, Bessel van der Kolk's, and then and then our psychology interprets it from our bodily states. So what would you say to that trauma is not just psychology, but it's also biology?
Well, the truth there is that human beings are not divisible. You can't separate the mind from the body. So very obviously, if I were to scream at you right now, that would create certain emotions, and those emotions would translate into physiology immediately. Your heart rate might go up, your muscles might tense, your blood pressure would go up, certain blood vessels would constrict, others would open up more. So that's just an obvious example of how emotions immediately affect the physiology. So when we are hurt, and in trauma, we are hurt, we're wounded. That's what the word trauma means. So when we are wounded emotionally, that immediately translates into not that it translates into, it's happening on all levels, so that the immune system and the emotional system and the nervous system and the hormonal apparatus are not separate systems. And the trouble is that this unity of mind and body, now, I often quote this. Socrates, 2,500 years ago, said that the problem with the doctors of today is that they separate the mind from the body. Well, we're still doing that. And what I'm saying is, you actually, and if you just, I'll just finish that answer by quoting or citing the indigenous concept of health. So in the North American indigenous teachings, there's something called the medicine wheel, and health rests on the medicine wheel, which is 4 quadrants. There's the physical, our bodies, our physiology. There's the mental, which is our thoughts and our emotions. There's the social, which means our relationships with each other and with the universe and other creatures. And then there's the spiritual, which is a sense of belonging and being connected with something much greater than just a little egos. Now, from their perspective, health resides in a balance between those 4 quadrants. Not only is that a beautiful metaphor, scientifically, it's also the only valid way to look at human beings. So that's why trauma is physiological as much as is anything else.
I learned not too long ago that Abraham Maslow, that famous pyramid that we know, the safety, the physiological needs, and it ends with self-actualization. Maslow actually spent time with indigenous communities. I think it's the Blackfeet, and he studied their models of behavior in society and interactions, and noticed that actually self-actualization wasn't at if he had to do a pyramid of what he learned about them, wouldn't be at the top of the pyramid, it would be at the base of it. Thinking and suggesting that in some indigenous communities, it is thought that self-actualization not only is innate, but is supported in every other need by community. So if we're asking today, how do we help leaders become more self-regulated, become more self-aware, if they don't pause between that bad phase that you wanted to give me, Gabor, just to test my bodily responses, or if a leader is screaming at an employee or vice versa, to be able to pause, and you said that earlier, to be able to pause right after we notice our bodily states, when we work, when we love, when we play, when we are in interactions with our loved ones, our family members, our coworkers, whatever it is. That pause, how necessary is it in order to react to life in a more conscious way?
Well, let me give you an answer and then ask you a question in response. There's a quote that's often attributed to the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, and he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. But he didn't actually say it. It was somebody else who said it. It was the American psychologist Rollo May who said that between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap is our freedom to choose our response. Now, very often what happens in trauma is we lose that gap. So there's a stimulus and we just react. And that reaction is based on some past programming, so that as much as we think we're free, if that gap that you refer to isn't there, there's no freedom in it. And so often in my life, and even recently, like I was speaking at a conference, somebody asked me a question and I lost the gap because the question was so emotionally close to me that I just allowed myself to get triggered. And then I had to work my way back to develop the gap and come back and address the issue differently. The question that arises for me is in your first statement or the second statement, you talked about inconvenient truth. And it's the fear of those truths that makes us not pause. So why is the truth so inconvenient?
Love your question. And by the way, I hope later you can tell us which question got you so emotional. I'm curious to know how you got touched that way. It's a beautiful, a situation to be in a way with the work that you're doing. So what makes us so afraid of the truth? I think I'm going to take exactly what we're talking about and just go one step even deeper. You listen to a lot of music, Gabor. You love poetry. I love poetry. Not too long ago, I was going for a walk. And usually I don't put anything in my ears, but this time I listened to a podcast and I love poets. And this time it was David White. And he said that one of our greatest ways to become conscious, mature, growing beings is to become a full citizen of our solitude. Our solitude, to be able to sit with ourselves in silence without feeling overwhelmed. And there's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Except here's the thing. How is it that we can feel safe enough if we haven't looked at the biology and at the root of our trauma to sit with our solitude when we live in a society where we live so fast, so out of touch with others, so glued to our screens? Maybe we were not allowed and we were not re-given this opportunity and this human right to self-knowledge, which goes through solitude, slowing down, listening to the body, being able to look at one another without feeling threatened by the difference of other people. This happens when we feel fragile. Fragile means not feeling calm to sit with our solitude. And I have chills just talking about this because poetry, music, art, which are universal languages, not only speaks to our minds, but it speaks to our souls, to our nervous systems. Because how else would you get people in apartheid in South Africa to be together beside maybe a sporting match? Or how else would you get people through music from all political stripes who are actually fighting in real life to listen to a concert in peace? This is happening as we speak. So I would say solitude versus loneliness is where health and wisdom compared to hypervigilance, hyper alertness, constant stress modes because of the way that we live in. And you say this all the time, Gabor. We are reacting normally to abnormal circumstances. So our little almond-shaped amygdala in our alert system in our brain is doing its work. But what we're doing is that we're putting all the brakes on it and on our bodies with high cortisol, high dopamine, circumstances and ways of living. And then we're lowering from a biological level our levels of serotonin, feel-good hormone, oxytocin, cuddling hormone. We need these. We are still the little children that want to be taken care of as adults, but depending on how we take care of ourselves and how we can sit with our solitude and marry that in a melancholic poetry, because we are here for a short time, as you say so well. I guess that would be the dance, the real dance.
Well, listen, so because you talk about poetry and you talk about solitude, let me give you one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite poets, okay? This is Rainer Maria Rilke and his letters to a young poet. And this is what he says. Do not allow yourself to be confused in your aloneness by the something within you that wishes to be released from it. This very wish, if you will calmly and deliberately use it as a tool, will help you expand your solitude into far distant realms. He says, people have, with the help of so many conventions, resolved everything the easy way, on the easiest side of the easy. But it is clear that we must embrace struggle. Every living thing conforms to it. Everything in nature grows and struggles in its own way, establishing its own identity, insisting on it at all costs against all resistance. So he's actually tying the willingness to accept solitude with the struggle to be fully ourselves, which he says is our true nature and our true purpose.
uh, I could weep very easily right now, because I think that whoever's listening, you know, we all have a story. We're all one trauma away from each other. It takes one dramatic life event to change your brain, to change the way you perceive yourself, the way you interact with this world, and how you see this dance between the light and the darkness, between your solitude and your loneliness, and how you can find your way through that middle ground, right? That place of home that we want to call home so badly, as being a child or as being a grown child. And I think
Well,
that what we're doing now is that we're learning to reparent ourselves, not to point the finger and say, oh, my parents didn't do this, they didn't do that. Yes, we do have to be conscious of, as parents and as mentors and as leaders, to not repeat and to not leave our trauma unresolved, because we're going to leave that emotional legacy onto our kids, who already have their work to do of finding their own solitude and be tuned into themselves and trust themselves, trust their bodies, trust themselves. And, you know, because now our kids are on screen so much, we're kind of impairing the development of the brain, because we're not allowing them to experience those periods of low risk, low cost years where they fall off their bike. They'll be fine. There's no parent going, oh my God, you're going to die, my child, right? So, and many other examples we could use. We need to build more, not only biological resilience, but psychological resilience. And I think that has to go through solitude. And the reason why I laughed when you shared your quote, it was a laughter of compassion and of tenderness. Because one
mm,
of my favorite quotes that I do want to share right now, and maybe you can comment on it, is from René Maria Rilke. And it
mm,
says, I want to unfold. Let there be no space inside me held closed. For where I am closed, I am false.
mm.
For where I am closed, I am false. And this brings me straight into your work when, Gabor, you talk about the fact that the difference between suffering and trauma, that suffering and pain is part of life. It's not dangerous.
Yeah,
Trauma is when a constriction happens, something closes. Can you elaborate on this?
yeah, sure. So, as the Buddha pointed out 2,500 years ago, life is suffering. Not life, not all life is suffering, but life brings suffering because there's loss. People die. Your pet dog will die before you do. You know, you recently endured the death of your father. You know, and so life is going to bring loss. We are wired for grief. In our brain, there's circuitry for grief. In our brain, there's circuitry for panic. When should we panic? If an infant is left alone and not picked up when they're crying, they can experience panic, which will cause them to scream even louder, which ideally should bring the parents running to pick them up. Now, when that doesn't happen, then being alone is associated with fear. And in our society, a lot of parents are told not to pick up the kids when they're crying. And you tell a mother cat or a mother bear to ignore the baby's distress, but human beings are trained not to. So then, when we're not allowed to move through all the emotions that life will inevitably evoke in us and for which our brains are wired, then later on in life, aloneness is associated with fear. Where solitude, I mean, my friend Gordon Neufeld, wonderful psychologist who you interviewed for your book, he once said jokingly that the only time I would send a kid to his room is when he says that he's bored. You know, then he says, then go and play and find something to do, you know, rather than here's a toy. You know,
No,
so
you know what? When my kids tell me that, Mom, I'm so bored, I said, if you're bored, it's because you're boring.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think Lubna, I think you're back on now.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And I see some people already raising their hands. We're going to transition to the next segment, if that's okay. Is that okay? I'd love to ask
Of
you a few
course.
questions, Sophie. And Dr. Gabor, feel free to stay, feel free to, it's up to you really how you'd like to play this. I just have a few questions and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Well, if the questions involve me, I'll stay for a few minutes. If not, I'll go because there's other stuff coming up. So what do you
Okay. The questions are for Sophie, and I think the other questions that came through from the Q&A, I'll make sure to touch base with the
Okay.
team and go back to some people to get them answers.
That
I want
case,
Thank you, Gabor.
okay,
thank you so much.
thank you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
So grateful for you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So, Sophie, I have a few questions for you, and I know that there's a lot of people who have their hands up. So we'll follow the same format as with Dr. Gabor. I loved the mention to the word stories. Obviously, I'm the founder of Stories, so I loved that mention. And you say when you shared your story through your book that it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. And there's a quote that I love that says, "A story untold is a story unhealed." My question to you is, as you were writing your book, did you feel that that brought you some healing?
Yes, my direct answer is yes. It also makes me think of, you know, the famous saying, you have a choice. When do you want the pain? Now or later? Because it's going to come. I think my assignment, my spiritual assignment, my physical assignment, my dharma, as we say, or my swadharma, is to really be able to face my truth so that I can be of service to myself in the best way possible, so I can serve others and go towards others. I'm an only child. I grew up in nature from 0 to 4, and I love humans. So in order for me to be able to lean in and have more compassion and more patience, which I didn't always have. Like, let's be clear here. One hopes that we evolve through a lifetime. Yes. And I want to be aware of my flaws. I want to be aware. Sometimes, you know, my friends will tell me, well, you had a blind spot there. And I'm like, what do you mean? I have eyes all around my head. I'm a mom of 3. But no, we all have blind spots. And usually those blind spots are the constrictions of our trauma. And they're in our bodies. We react to them constantly. And as Gabor says often, every upset is a setup. So every time you get upset, it's a setup to see how are you going to react in front of your employer, employee, lover, friend, family member, whatever it is. Are you going to react from the fire of what the situation caused, or the heartache, or the sadness, or the whatever? Or will you pause, slow down, and be able to react in a way that is regulated with a certain perspective? This is the story of our world. Look at the state of the world right now. If you see leaders that are leading people, and millions of people, from a place of fear, from a place of insecure attachment, from a place of fragility, instead of from a place of compassion and patience and gentleness, you will have the results that we see in many areas of this world. This is a very deep simplification of what is happening, but there is a neurobiological imperative to the health of our democracies and of our non-democracies. So yes, it was not easy to look at my truths, and everybody has a story, and we have to remind each other that we should never judge each other in our own suffering, because you could be in a castle with fancy cars and diamonds. That's not my dream, but you could be there and be completely dysregulated, suffering in a dark place in the abyss, and you can live in a tent with almost nothing and be very well regulated and happy. So, and then you can be in between everywhere. So we just have to be a little bit more gentle when it comes to human suffering, to know that one, we're all one trauma away from each other, and two, we need each other to heal. Yes, we must sit with our solitude, but in order to feel safe enough, we have to develop this sense of belonging and of community. It's at the core of who we are as human beings.
Absolutely. And I love the power of community. The power of the community is much stronger than the power of one. So I love that.
Yes.
You mentioned in your book on page 122 that it's our birthright as human beings to have an opportunity to develop a sense of purpose, but unfortunately, not many of us are able to do that or don't know how to do that. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked for Gabor. If you could come up with a formula for finding purpose, what would it be?
I don't think there's a formula. Let's be blunt here, right? Because a formula means almost like a 1 or 2 step equation to finding happiness and bliss. I think first of all, we have to redefine the notion of what it means to express and be successful in our lives. So we have for way too long, built our notion of success on recognition and what we get and what kind of validation that we get instead of contribution. Ask people from a young age or older, when they start doing volunteer work, what happens? We are wired to be in connection with other human beings. So even if you're, very well, you're privileged, you live a privileged life, you're educated, or you're in the opposite, you don't have access to education, and you're in your stress mode all the time. So in the middle and between us are only humans. So it's in that human that we have to look. That distance is filled with humanity. We just have to come closer together, no pun intended, but it's no joke that I chose the title to my book, because physically it's true, psychologically it's true, and spiritually it's true. So if we had to find a formula, I would say that self-knowledge and capacity to have a discipline in your life to regulate your nervous system. It may sound not sexy, it may sound, dry, but it's true and it works. So for me, it's my exercise, it's my mat, my yoga mat, it's my breathing exercises, but it's also this that I hope that you address today, and that we address today as a community. As human beings, we're meant to learn through positive stress. Okay, we need to build resilience in our mitochondria, which is the energy producing space in our cells, in our trillions of cells in our body. And in order to do that, to be able to face the stresses of life with less anxiety and depression and mental health issues, we need to be able to build more resilience. And that means we need to put ourselves in good stressful positions, like taking risks, like leaning into a new relationship, that's also a risk, like doing hot cold immersions, like doing breathing exercises and breath holds, like putting ourselves and our physical body into more difficult situations so that we know what we're made of. When we do this at a young age and we accumulate this knowledge in our minds, in our brains, in our bodies, we build this resilience. And because we're living in this chaotic, crazy, fast-paced, very intense world and environment that constantly tells our nervous system, hey, there's a saber-toothed tiger in the room, you're under threat, but there's none, right? And we're going to push away the situations here where people have abusive households and all of this, because I know that it exists. And sometimes that sense of safety is not even available in your own household. More than another reason to give the gift of self-regulation to human beings from a young age, from classrooms to know how to deal with stress and relationships in the classroom or before exams, within our own households, everything happens there before we get out into the world. So our practice, our discipline, our education on self-regulation is at the root of a lot of healing and I would say inner conflict.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Yes. I know that people really want to ask you questions, so I'm just going to play the same game that I played with Gabor because it's really quick and it's a would you rather question.
I love to play.
All right, awesome. Let's go for it. So purpose or profit?
Purpose.
Authenticity or attachment?
Authenticity.
All the way. At the cost that it comes with.
Exactly.
Meditation or movement?
I have to say both.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll take
sorry.
both today.
Yeah.
Extra hour of sleep or extra hour of doing something you love?
Sleep. I'm perimenopausal. Sleep.
Wealth or mental health?
Mental wealth.
Mental wealth. I love that. And return on investment or return on innovation?
Return on innovation and creativity.
All right. And if you could choose to talk to either your 8-year-old self or your 80-year-old self in the future, which would you choose?
I'm going to choose to go where life brings me without resistance. And I am aging and I'm going to accept that. So I would say my 80-year-old, I've never been put in this mental space before. Wow. That's really powerful. I think I would tell her, you loved enough. You loved enough. So it's time, love. Sorry.
Beautiful. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability. And you're getting a
The
lot of
only
love.
way to live. I'm seeing all the hearts.
Yes, you are getting a lot of hearts because you deserve them. You
No.
totally deserve them. All right. And your favorite, you mentioned your favorite quote. And if you could pick an AI that would improve your mental health, we're in the age of AI. If you could pick any form of AI that would improve your mental health, what would it be? And that's my last question.
Wow. Any form of AI that would improve my mental health. I would say, this is crazy, but you're making me dream, right? We don't know where AI is going to bring us, that I could find myself in the most beautiful nature at any time.
I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
To be able to connect that way. Yeah.
Yeah, nature is healing. Well,
It
thank
is.
you so much. I'm going to bring a few people on the screen to ask you their question. And I believe we are starting, Nadine, with Helen Huang, who has pre-submitted a question already. Helen, if we can have you come on screen, please. Nadine, if you can bring Helen on the screen. I can't see anyone.
So I do, one thing to say is that we have received a lot of questions in the Q&A about finding our purpose, and I believe that we've had a good amount of response to that from Dr. Gabor and from Sophie, so thank you all. And Helen, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking this question. Hello, Sophie.
Hi.
So I'm the head of human resources at a tech scale-up here in Ottawa.
Oh, wow.
And part of my mandate is to enable and coach people managers to be better leaders. And something that I found, and I found this at every organization I've worked, is that at times leaders may be reluctant to be honest about when they need help. So it could be about developing capability, like a skill that they don't have, or maybe they're feeling overwhelmed and they truly do need support and help. And I think it's because they fear if they're vulnerable, that it might undermine their credibility as leaders. Yeah. And I mean, that's something I've admired about you. I cheered up just now based on Lovena's wonderful question. And it's how confident you are in your vulnerability. So I'm just wondering, based on your research and your lived experiences, if you have any advice or guidance for me and other leaders on how they can be more vulnerable without giving away our power.
That's such a great question, Helen. I think that vulnerability is power, because it demonstrates that you can sit with your solitude, going back to the conversation that we had, and exposing it. Vulnerability is solitude, and solitude is vulnerability. May not seem so apparent at first, But being vulnerable is being able to open up, right? Break open. And when you sit with your solitude, that's the work that you do. Now, let me be very clear. Not too long ago, because I transformed my personal relationship and my marriage, I chose my authenticity over my attachment, okay? It's a very, 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 very hard thing to do. And for all the mothers or mentors or women and men as well listening today, obviously, everybody, but because we carry, and still today, women are the nucleus of the family, and we carry the emotional load of our family members, we learn that we need to put others' needs first in order to, in a way, not perform, but become the best parent, or become the best mentor, become the best guide. But the work of vulnerability is imperfect, and I fall flat onto my face still today, and I make mistakes. You know what? It's okay. It's okay because it comes from a good place. And sometimes somebody who loves me and knows me will say, you have these blinders on right here in this situation. And I'm like, I kind of want to swear in good Quebec or French here, but I really keep it real with myself, thinking, okay, love, you think you have it all figured out, but really you don't. And that to me is love. Gabor was saying earlier that the brain doesn't like uncertainty. None of us like uncertainty. And as non-apparent as it may be right now from you looking at me, I have a lot of uncertainty in my life. And I'm learning to cut ties of attachment, whether it's with my teenagers. I lost my dad. I'm transforming my relationship. There's changes in my careers. And as a 50-year-old woman, very soon, I'm really realizing that the more I try and fall and get back up, my nervous system, my brain, and my heart is learning. So there's nothing you can't do. So Helen, Nadine, Lena, Miriam, I'm seeing so many names here. I would like to name you all that are listening right now. There is nothing you can't do if you are willing to sit with the inconvenience of your truth. It is not dangerous. Human emotions are not dangerous. Panic is. And by the way, Helen, when we've tried all systems, when the body, because of the trauma that we carry, because of the stories that inhabit us in our own bodies, when all have been tested and don't work, that's when we go into depression. Okay? That's when the whole body says, shut down, I can't do this anymore. It's understandable. There is no shame or guilt to be felt here. What we need to do is lean in, understand why things are happening to us, whether we're CEO of a company or whether we're consulting or mentoring or guiding a CEO of a company. So I would say, in your own ways of being, authenticity is not a choice. Well, yes, it is actually. It is a choice. But authenticity is a way of living, a way of being inside of your own body and being in coherence and integrity with how you feel, what's coming up, and how honest are you catching it and repairing it when it happens. Because repairs are not just, oh, I'm sorry to an employee, to a sister, to a sibling, to a husband or whatever. It's, where did I not see it right here? Because every upset is a setup. We tell each other the story continuously depending on our wound of attachment from childhood. I have one of emotional abandonment because my father, when I started being a woman, didn't know how to deal with that. So he emotionally retracted. So when I'm in a relationship and somebody kind of makes me feel like I'm not part of something or that they don't care, that's triggered right away. So I would say in a corporate context, the most important thing is to know, to dig into the psychology of employees and bosses, but to also make hierarchies smaller and more horizontal, so that the vulnerability pattern is shared and not only, how can I say that, not only model behavior. It has to be shared behavior.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Helen. And I think we have Jamie next up. If Jamie can come, we'll take 2 more questions only. And if I can ask you to keep the questions brief and the answers brief, because we have Dr. Caroline ready in the room and joining us, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do we have Jamie here, or do we go to the next person?
If I can ask you please to, yes, come up on screen and please unmute yourself.
Hi, Sophie. Hi, Lubna.
Hi, Jamie.
I'm so happy to be here, and I will be joining the panelist stage tomorrow. So I am just so grateful, Sophie, for everything that you've shared and the work that you're putting out. My question for you, I am a founder and an entrepreneur of a small business here in Canada, and I'm also the interim CEO for Startup Canada that works with startups all throughout Canada. And one of the things that you said that I found was so powerful, and I've read a lot and done the work around, you know, the white saber-toothed tiger in the room. And I can really speak on behalf of small business owners that that saber-toothed tiger is in the room all the time as a business owner. And, you know, 97% of people in Canada are employed by small business owners, right? So it's a very big majority of us out there who are constantly feeling that saber-toothed tiger in the room when we're fighting for our lives, fighting for our businesses, let alone the trauma and, you know, our own personal lives. It's sort of this constant state of anxiety and trauma. You know, even when things are really good, it's still a high stress environment. What would you say, or what advice would you have for business owners and leaders and entrepreneurs who are constantly trying to balance maintaining and, you know, joining the journey of well-being so that their teams are taken care of and that their businesses and their customers aren't being responded to by someone in a high trauma environment, you know, in their own heads and in their own worlds? What advice would you give for entrepreneurs who live in high stress?
I would give a very short answer because I know we're short on time. It's a great question. Two things. The first one is, well, make sure that you are discerning between the apparent threat and is there a threat, right? So you have to assess the situation with all the knowledge that you have, like Jamie as a leader, and all the work that you've been doing to see what is the actual threat. And is my business actually, you know, under siege every single day? You said even when it goes well, Sophie, we still have that. So it sounds to me like there is a psychological pattern here to be looked at again and again, because if the threat is not real, although being a single owning, you know, proprietor of a business is always kind of stressful, there's a difference between stress, which leads up to action, and to take action and to say, okay, this I can solve, this I cannot, this I can control, this I cannot. And the deep anxiety that means you're not going to sleep at night because you think about this all the time. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is practice, practice, practice. Bring in a self-regulating practice in your day before you start as somebody who leads others, and in your corporation to be able to offer it to other people. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Sophie. I think we're going to pause here, although we still have a lot of questions. I just want to make sure that we don't delay Dr. Caroline too much. Sophie, I am so grateful for all your support. You have supported us so much, and I'm so, so grateful. And thank you for being here. You are a gift in this world. Thank you for everything you've done, and we're very grateful for you.
Sending love and courage to everybody. Be well, my friends.